Do you still remember the faces that once defined the vibrant spring of our youth? The shy maiden with pure, sorrowful eyes. The majestic queen radiating absolute power, or the proud iron lady of black and white film noir. We traverse those finest years alongside them, forever believing in a saintly beauty without a single blemish. But behind the heavy, closed velvet curtains of Hollywood, they too were merely human beings, creatures of instinct, raw cravings, and those subterranean dark corners that the camera lens never dared to touch. Could anyone have ever imagined that the shy lady we once cherished as a beacon of virtue concealed such naked secrets beneath the shadows of ancient oaks? Or that a majestic queen would use her cold, sharp allure to manipulate the most lustful and base instincts, exactly as the stinging accusation Errol Flynn left in his final suicide note before his eyes closed forever? In Vancouver, on a biting winter night in 1959, within a hotel room thick with the stagnant stench of gin and tobacco smoke, Errol Flynn, the ultimate rogue who had squeezed every last drop of life until the end, took his final solitary breath at the age of 50. He left behind not just his autobiography, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, but a suicide note that tore back the magnificent velvet veil to expose a quagmire of deception. Rising from the shadows of Mulholland Farm, which once stood witness to his most debauched revelries, the list of the 7 most lustful women has officially surfaced. Join us as we pull back the long, closed velvet curtain to witness the moment these monuments of virtue crumble before the rogue's final narrative, where the most intimate secrets will reveal a hauntingly different perspective of the goddesses we spent our entire youth worshiping. 1. Lupe Velez, Manic Fire and the White Knights of Treachery. Flynn famously christened Lupe the Mexican Spitfire, but her rampant promiscuity was far more than a mere personality trait. It was a lethal, cold-blooded weapon. Whispers from the shadows of the era suggest that during the opulent, drug-fueled parties at Mulholland Farm, Lupe frequently executed a ruthless script. She would appear luminous on Flynn's arm, only to immediately ignite a scorched earth flirtation with any man who caught her eye, ranging from high-ranking A-list titans to nameless, wide-eyed waiters. One of the most classic and chilling anecdotes is known as the Garden of Eden incident. That night, Mulholland Farm was choked with the cloying, heavy scent of jasmine and the slithering rhythms of a Mexican jazz orchestra. While Flynn was busy raising glasses to the power brokers of Warner Brothers, Lupe had already ensnared a young security guard named Billy, a boy only days on the job and still trembling in the wake of her beauty. Amidst that sea of elite guests, she required no ornate invitation. She merely brushed her hand carelessly across Billy's belt, sinking her crimson-painted nails into his skin as she dragged him into the obsidian shadows behind the kidney-shaped pool. Flynn, in a haze of gin and ego, eventually noticed the void where his lover should be. He carved through the dense foliage with a flashlight, only to find her signature red silk dress draped over a briar of thorns, shredded and torn as if it were a declaration of war. Lupe vanished for hours into that darkness with the wretched boy, leaving Flynn to be gnawed by a very public disgrace. When she finally re-emerged as the party breathed its last, her appearance was a wreckage. Hair wild, clothes disarrayed, but her eyes blazed with the fire of a successful hunt. She stared directly into Flynn's soul, laughing with a mocking triumph. Immediately after, she collapsed before the stone statue of the Virgin Mary in the hall, shrieking prayers in Spanish with the frantic cadence of a repenting psychotic, a tableau that was simultaneously hallowed and stomach-churning. The blood kiss at the Trocadero stands as another visceral proof of her manic infidelity. During a 1938 masquerade ball at the Trocadero, Lupe arrived in a skimpy Mayan queen costume, arm in arm with Flynn. However, she ignored him entirely, spending the night fondling an unknown actor fresh to Hollywood. Before Flynn and a swarm of flashing camera lenses, Lupe pulled the young man into a primal embrace and sank her teeth into his neck, leaving a deep, hemorrhaging bite mark. She then casually used Flynn's own silk handkerchief to wipe the gore from her lips, whispering, "This one tastes more like a man than you ever could, Errol." This public display of lewdness was not mere betrayal. It was a calculated attempt to emasculate Flynn to satisfy her insatiable thirst for notoriety. The drama at Ciro's revealed a brazenness that bordered on the obscene. Flynn had chosen a secluded VIP corner to find some semblance of peace, but to Lupe, privacy was a personal insult. Sitting right beside Flynn, she nonchalantly used her blood-red lipstick to scrawl her hotel room number onto a white linen napkin. With a flick of her finger, she slid it across to Johnny Weissmuller, the Tarzan star and one of Flynn's closest friends. The act was so overt that the entire club seemed to stop breathing. Flynn went feral, crushing the crystal glass in his hand until his own blood seeped from his palm. Lupe merely shrugged with a provocative, sultry smile. "Darling, you have a world of women kneeling at your feet. Why can't I have one strong Tarzan in my jungle?" It was a jagged knife to Flynn's ego, twisted before the Hollywood elite. Deep in the lightless shadows of this bond was the stain at Santa Fe Station. Legend has it that Lupe once lost her mind upon seeing Flynn flirt with another starlet. Instead of a typical scene of jealousy, she chose a counterattack of raw, public lust. In 1939, as Flynn prepared to board the Santa Fe train for a promotional tour, Lupe arrived in a gleaming black limousine. But she was not alone. She was draped over Gary Cooper, Flynn's greatest rival, a man possessed of a ruggedness that Flynn secretly envied. Amidst the shriek of the locomotive and clouds of blinding steam, Lupe staged a performance of ultimate promiscuity. Directly in Flynn's line of sight, she pulled Cooper into her red-tipped fingers tracing the back of his neck as she gave him a kiss so primal and suffocating it seemed as if the world contained only the two of them. She ensured Flynn saw her ragged breath. When Flynn stepped forward in a rage, Lupe drew a small pistol from her purse, not to shoot him, but to fire into the air like a celebratory ritual for her own treachery. She screamed across the platform that Flynn was a mediocre peasant compared to Cooper's prowess, turning a farewell into a powder-burned play of absolute disgrace. Lupe's treachery reached its zenith in the tale of Sighs Through the Glass. Flynn, in a morbid attempt to understand her heart, had installed a two-way mirror in Lupe's dressing room. One night, he sat in the suffocating darkness of the secret chamber, watching her through the cold glass. Lupe entered with a total stranger she had plucked from a cheap downtown dive bar. She knew Flynn was behind that glass. Her eyes occasionally flicked toward the mirror with a mocking glint that betrayed her knowledge. She performed the most lecherous acts, her whispers of desire for the stranger amplified, so that Flynn had to witness his own betrayal in silence. Flynn sat there, clutching a bottle of gin, feeling the chill of betrayal seep into his marrow. For Lupe, love was a carnal power game where she turned Flynn into a pathetic spectator in his own domain, blurring the line between pleasure and agony until it vanished entirely. 2. Lily Demeta, the Tiger Woman and the Art of Mutilating Self-Esteem. Lily Demeta did not marry Errol Flynn out of a sense of love. She was the cold, calculating embodiment of a French starlet's hunger for ultimate power in the hierarchy of Hollywood. Flynn christened her the Tiger Woman, a moniker written in a visceral cocktail of blood and salt tears. It was a name that did more than hint at her predatory ferocity in the bedroom or the jagged red welts she left across Flynn's back. It spoke to the way she stalked and disemboweled his self-respect with the most brazen public promiscuity, transforming his existence into a tragic, obsidian-hued film noir. The predatory essence of Lily's nature was etched in its most vitriolic form during the National Casino betrayal. In 1935, during their very honeymoon in Havana, a city then choking on the cloying scent of dark rum and the smoke of expensive cigars, Lily unmasked the hunter within. Amidst the suffocating, dense opulence of the Casino Nacional, draped in a shimmering silver silk gown, she offered no attention to her new husband. Instead, before Flynn's very eyes, she danced with a localized mafia don, her movements a lewd, rhythmic invitation. Her white-painted fingernails grazed his lapel, and her shrill, mocking laughter echoed over the clatter of dice, like a bucket of ice water thrown in Flynn's face. When he attempted to pull her away, Lily offered only a cold, champagne-scented sneer, whispering, "Errol, you are merely a boy swinging a prop sword on a film set. Here, in the shadows, I require the warmth of real men who hold the levers of dark power." Her ease was not a sign of simple indulgence. It was a calculated performance designed to remind him that he was nothing more than a pawn in her game of social and professional ascent. Lily's brazenness escalated into a full-scale psychological haunting during the Ghosts of the Queen Mary incident. In 1938, during an Atlantic crossing, the first-class deck of the Queen Mary became Flynn's personal psychological dungeon. While he wrestled with the physical agony of seasickness and the weight of isolation, Lily turned the central bar into a stage for her own debauchery. She spent hours seducing a cluster of young officers, her manic, flirtatious laughter merging with the mournful, distant wail of the ship's foghorn in the mist. Whispers suggest that Flynn eventually discovered her in the lightless intimacy of an escape hatch with a common steward. When caught red-handed, Lily felt no tremor of shame. Instead, she reached into Flynn's own wallet, withdrew a $100 bill, and slapped it against the young man's chest as a tip for his excellent service, all while staring directly into her husband's shattered, disbelieving eyes. To Lily, the betrayal of loyalty was a visceral pleasure, a symbolic act to trample the ego of the man the entire world desired. The theatrical cruelty reached a fever pitch during the rage at Mulholland Farm. One storm-lashed night, within the flickering, uncertain shadows of the Playhouse mansion, Flynn discovered Lily in a compromising position with the family's own gardener right in the library. Instead of a display of remorse, Lily snatched a heavy, decorative dagger from the wall and pursued a fleeing Flynn through the dark, echoing hallways. Her eyes were wide with a manic, carnal delirium. She shrieked that Flynn lacked the prowess to satisfy a tiger of her caliber. This macabre anecdote cemented Lily's image as a dangerous predator, one willing to use both physical violence and sexual degradation to maintain her psychological stranglehold over her miserable husband. However, the absolute zenith of her malice lay in the torture calls from Mexico City. During the long stretches when Flynn was left solitary at Mulholland Farm, the rhythmic buzzing of the vintage telephone became a bell tolling from hell. From the luxury of the Reforma Hotel in Mexico, Lily would place calls at 3 a.m. Against a chaotic background of mariachi music and the raucous laughter of men in the midst of a bacchanal, she forced Flynn to listen as she flirted with her guests. Her voice came through the receiver, shrill and as sharp as a straight razor. "Listen closely, Errol. This Mexican man is far stronger than you could ever be. Be a darling and remember to sign the checks for our hotel bill in the morning." She had weaponized sex into a tool for extortion and violent psychological warfare, forcing Flynn to finance his own public humiliation. She transformed him into a cross-border cuckold, paying for the very infidelity that was slowly killing him. Every call was a jagged blade carving into Flynn's already fractured soul. The lewdness of Lily Demita was not a simple matter of a wandering eye. It was a supreme, sadistic joy found in watching a global masculine icon fall to his knees, helpless, aging, and broken beneath the needle-sharp points of her heels. Lily never required Flynn's love. She required his wreckage to fuel her own cruel aura, forcing him to live out his final years in a state of manic jealousy and crushing debt until his eyes finally closed for the last time. 3. Anne Sheridan, the oomph girl and the primal instinct of decadent freedom. Anne Sheridan was never the type of woman to remain entombed within the hollow, hypocritical moralities of the Hollywood machine. Sculpted by Warner Brothers into the ultimate oomph girl icon, Anne weaponized that lethal sexuality in her private life to challenge Errol Flynn with an arrogant, searing promiscuity. She transformed every man in her orbit into a mere discordant note within a symphony of sin and decadence, a performance designed to leave Flynn's ego in ruins. The most seismic event, and a wound that festered deep within Flynn's psyche, was the Playhouse scandal during the sweltering summer of 1941. Within the walls of Mulholland Farm, thick with the choking haze of Lucky Strike cigarettes and the biting sting of bourbon, Anne appeared like a carnal specter. She wore a black silk gown so thin and fragile that every defiant curve of her body was telegraphed through the amber gloom. While Flynn was busy boasting of his cinematic swordsmanship, Anne nonchalantly draped herself across the lap of a nameless saxophone player, a starving artist with a hollow, hungry gaze. Before Flynn's eyes, which were already bloodshot with a cocktail of rage and jealousy, she shared a glass of hard liquor with the musician, her crimson lips lingering on the rim. Her long, elegant fingers grazed the silver keys of the instrument, while her eyes locked onto Flynn's with a mocking, predatory glint. Whispers from the studio wings later recounted that she lured the man into the mansion's secret passages, the very places where Flynn had installed his clandestine recording devices. Flynn was forced to sit in the suffocating darkness of his monitoring room, self-flagellating as the mournful, visceral wail of the saxophone merged with Anne's manic, flirtatious laughter. He was left alone, a broken swashbuckler smashing a bottle of red wine against the floorboards, a mirror of his own trampled dignity. The drama ignited again in 1943 at the Mocambo, the undisputed arena of lust and power on the Sunset Strip. Knowing Flynn was tracking her every move from a VIP table with a pathological possessiveness, Anne orchestrated a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. She publicly enticed Jack L. Warner, the titan of the studio who held the very keys to Flynn's career, to join her on the dance floor. Under the purple haze of tobacco smoke and the cold fire of crystal chandeliers, she draped her arms over Jack's shoulders, casting scorched earth glances that haunted the room. When Flynn approached, his face ashen with the weight of the insult, Anne slowly peeled off a white silk glove. She delivered a light, mocking slap across his cheek and whispered into his ear amidst the roar of the jazz band. "Errol, in this city of lights, no one truly belongs to anyone. Tonight, I belong to whoever provides the genuine sensation of power and carnal thrill, rather than empty, hollow promises." Her ease that night was not mindless indulgence. It was a calculated political strike against Flynn's gargantuan ego, reducing him to a pathetic spectator in a Game of Thrones where she held all the cards. The most haunting and visceral anecdote, often whispered in the late hours at Los Angeles social clubs, was the dawn ritual on the desolate set of Silver River. Director Raoul Walsh recounted witnessing Anne perform a macabre, carnal ritual amidst the freezing mist of the Rocky Peaks. After a long night of debauchery with two nameless stuntmen she had plucked from a roadside dive bar, Anne appeared outside Flynn's tent at first light in a state of ultimate, unrepentant lewdness. She nonchalantly consumed mountain oysters, a dish she believed contained the masculine essence required to restore her predatory allure. While the two cowboys served her like the lowliest of servants, she ensured Flynn saw this display of ease through the slit in his tent, forcing him to hear her laughter mingling with the raucous Mexican music in the biting morning chill. In the final ragged pages of his autobiography, Flynn wrote with a trembling hand, "I stood behind that mirror, breath held, watching Anne laugh with those strangers. She knew I was there. She intended for me to see her infidelity as a poisoned blade driven straight into my pride." Anne wasn't just a woman. She was a ruthless punishment for every sin I ever committed against women. She was easy for the world, but cold and brutal to me, the only man who truly loved her to the point of madness, but could never chain that wild obsidian soul. This dark reality exposes Anne Sheridan as the ghost of promiscuity that served as a permanent reminder of Flynn's desperate impotence. She was a woman truly free, truly ruthless, and utterly devoid of the concept of remorse. 4. Bette Davis, Power, Promiscuity, and the Dark Secrets of the Warner Brothers Queen. In the orbit of Bette Davis, carnality was never a mindless surrender. It was a cold-blooded negotiation for absolute sovereignty. For the classic American audience, her image is forever etched by those cavernous, searching eyes, but few realized she weaponized her own sexuality as a psychological engine to enslave the most vainglorious leading men. Betty had no need for the cheap, fluttering invitations of a starlet. She utilized her predatory nature and an authoritative suppression to transform Errol Flynn, a man who believed himself the emperor of all women, into a pathetic, hollowed-out victim. Within the iron gates of Warner Brothers, Bette gifted Flynn her darkest secrets through a brand of prideful lewdness, proving that in her world, the great swashbuckler was nothing more than a puppet on a fraying string. The most seismic anecdote began with the Curtiz Gambit during the filming of The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex. Amidst the humorous, regal shadows of the set, Davis appeared draped in the formidable, bone-white makeup of Queen Elizabeth I. She publicly broadcast her contempt for Flynn's debauched lifestyle in a truly sadistic fashion. She began a feverish, overt flirtation with director Michael Curtiz, the very man locked in a bitter, violent feud with Flynn. A dark truth whispered from the production's underbelly suggests that Davis demanded a private trailer from the studio for the sole purpose of inviting Curtiz inside during breaks, while Flynn was relegated to waiting outside in the blistering, skin-scorching California sun. Davis was promiscuous with a terrifying precision, ensuring Flynn could hear her suggestive, muffled laughter echoing through the thin wooden door. She used the allure of a sovereign to isolate him on his own film set. The fever pitch arrived during the scene where the Queen slaps Essex. Refusing all cinematic technique, Davis demanded 18 retakes, and each time she hammered Flynn's face with a genuine, full-force blow fueled by pure, unadulterated loathing. Witnesses claimed that after the final strike left Flynn's lip hemorrhaging, she leaned into his ear, her breath thick with the scent of heavy grease paint, and asked with ice in her voice, "Does being crushed by a woman make you feel any more like a man?" The tremors continued at the Warner Brothers commissary, where studio staff still recount the drama of Bette Davis publicly eviscerating Flynn's ego before the entire crew. When Flynn attempted to offer her a glass of wine as a peace offering, Betty nonchalantly poured the vintage onto the feet of a lowly waiter. She then commanded the boy to kneel and wipe it clean before granting him a lingering, lewd stroke of his hair. She stared into Flynn's eyes with a blade-like intensity, demonstrating that even a common servant received more of her favor than a world-famous icon. Internal security reports from the era reveal that Davis frequently utilized script meetings in Jack Warner's office to stage sophisticated plays of infidelity, drawing producers into carnal power games specifically to make Flynn feel discarded at the periphery of power. Davis's carnal cruelty bled into the Ambassador Hotel incident of 1942. Amidst the suffocating opulence and the jagged political conspiracies of Hollywood, Davis emerged as a goddess of the shadows. Knowing Flynn was tracking her with a manic desperation from a nearby VIP table, she chose to punish him by being shamelessly promiscuous with a nameless, destitute young poet she had dragged from a cheap downtown cafe. Before the eyes of Flynn and the studio moguls, Davis allowed the boy to fondle her bare shoulders beneath the cold fire of crystal chandeliers, granting him the scorched earth glances Flynn had spent years begging for but never received. Her ease with someone she considered lesser was the sharpest knife to cut the pride of Hollywood's premier rogue, proving that in Bette's hierarchy, Flynn was worth less than a valet. The shocking climax of the drama saw her publicly leading the poet to her private suite, while she intentionally left a scarf embroidered with Errol Flynn's name abandoned on the doorstep like a piece of public refuse. However, the most macabre secret buried in the foundations of Mulholland Farm was the two-way mirror counterattack. Flynn had once smugly invited Davis to his mansion, hoping to use his clandestine network of peepholes to collect her most naked, unguarded moments. But Davis, possessing the instincts of a master predator, immediately detected the gaps behind the decorative paintings. Instead of exposing him, she staged a performance of infidelity that was truly horrifying. She took a complete stranger into the room. Under the amber glow of the lamps, she engaged in the most lewd acts, yet her eyes periodically flicked directly toward the two-way mirror with a terrifying composure, as if she wanted Flynn to know she was staring through his cowardice. She used her own carnality as a toxic draft to psychologically castrate Flynn, turning him into a helpless, humiliated spectator to a betrayal showcased within his own kingdom. In the trembling manuscript pages discovered after his death, Flynn left behind a haunting confession regarding this dark queen. Betty never surrendered for love. Her flesh was a death sentence for any man who dared to crave it. That night, in the cloying darkness of the Mulholland basement, I sat like a soulless corpse behind that glass, watching her in the arms of a nobody. Damn her, she knew I was there. Every sharp glance, every defiant, ragged breath aimed straight at that cold glass was a blade driven into the heart of my pride. Betty turned my own sick vice into a noose for my neck, forcing me to watch her be lewd with the world just to affirm that I, the great Errol Flynn, was merely a groveling footman at her heels. It was the zenith of carnal brutality, a betrayal of the soul so naked that no cellar of bourbon could ever wash away the loathing currently gnawing at my marrow. Bette Davis was more than a star. She was the most formidable ghost on Flynn's list, the woman who used carnal desire to trample the heart of the great swordsman, leaving him shattered in a castle built of his own sins. 5. Olivia de Havilland, the gilded sanctity and the lethal promiscuity of a fallen angel. Olivia de Havilland remained the most harrowing secret of Errol Flynn's existence, primarily because her infidelity did not manifest through crude, overt actions, but through a meticulously calculated, fake sanctity designed to enslave the male psyche. For Flynn, who perpetually worshipped her as a holy land amidst the scorched, carnal desert of Hollywood, the revelation of Olivia's easy nature was the most jagged, blood-soaked knife driven into his final remnants of faith. She was not merely a master of the invitation of silence, but a predator concealed beneath sorrowful eyes and a shy, demure smile. A psychological weapon that ensured every man in Flynn's orbit harbored a desperate, secret craving to possess the angel. The first authentic anecdote of her duplicity began on the remote, mist-shrouded set of The Adventures of Robin Hood in 1938. While embodying the virginal Maid Marian, Olivia was simultaneously orchestrating a sophisticated play of lewdness behind the scenes. Whispers from the production crew recount that during the long, grueling breaks in filming, she frequently lured cinematographers and even nameless wandering waiters into the deepest, darkest groves of the ancient oaks at Bidwell Park. Clad in her iconic white silk dress, the very symbol of her cinematic purity, she would strip away the mask to engage in the most lustful acts within the obsidian shadows of those old trees. Moments later, she would emerge back into the blinding studio lights with the face of a pristine saint. It was here that Flynn began to grasp the terrifying reality. His angel possessed the carnal instincts of a master hunter. She utilized her feigned high-mindedness specifically to ignite Flynn's manic jealousy, reducing him to a pathetic, groveling footman who craved a devotion she only granted to nameless strangers. Her manipulative promiscuity was inextricably linked to the name of the eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes. The Hollywood grapevine has never forgotten the drama christened The Flight of Disgrace. While Flynn was painstakingly arranging a candlelit romantic dinner at his mansion, preparing to finally offer a marriage proposal, Olivia was nonchalantly boarding Howard Hughes' private aircraft at Burbank Airport. She intentionally ensured that the paparazzi captured her easy, flirtatious smile directed toward Hughes as she stepped into the first-class cabin. It was a calculated act of lewdness designed to punish Flynn and assert her dominance on the social ladder of the elite. For Olivia, sex was a political chess piece. She was willing to trade her perceived purity for privileges Flynn could never provide, forcing the world's premier rogue to sit as a helpless spectator to her transcontinental carnal journeys. The absolute peak of her spiritual betrayal occurred during the 1947 Academy Awards. Amidst the high society glitter of the Ambassador Hotel, Olivia did more than just secure a gold statuette. She executed a psychological execution aimed directly at Flynn's heart. She spent the entire night in a state of arrogant promiscuity, flirting with a cluster of powerful New York producers. She used her shy silence to invite them into a carnal power game right before Flynn's crumbling eyes. A chillingly true anecdote describes her on a smoke-filled balcony, casually sharing a primal, lingering kiss with Flynn's most bitter rival in exchange for a guaranteed lead role. Moments later, she returned to the banquet table, with eyes as clear and innocent as if she had never touched the grime of the world. Her ease that night was a ruthless message. Flynn was merely an obsolete toy, and the angel had found far more powerful launch pads for her ambition. The most macabre secret was finally unmasked by Flynn himself at Mulholland Farm, through the freezing glass of the two-way mirror he had installed. Flynn sat in the dark, stalking Olivia in the guest suite, desperately hoping to find a singular shred of evidence of her purity to salvage his own soul. But the reality was more visceral than any nightmare. Olivia entered the room with a young man she had plucked from a cheap roadside dive bar. Under the amber, flickering lamps, she completely discarded her saintly shell, performing the most lewd and easy acts, behaviors Flynn had never dared to even imagine. Most horrifyingly, she periodically stared directly into the two-way mirror with a mocking, defiant smile, as if she knew precisely that Flynn was shattering behind the glass. She used her own infidelity to psychologically castrate him, transforming his lifelong adoration into a cruel, hollow joke within his own kingdom. In the trembling manuscript pages discovered after his death, Flynn wrote of Olivia with a raw, authentic disgust. Olivia, she is a demon possessed of the most magnificent angel's face I have ever beheld. She is the sharpest, most jagged knife on this list, the one who used a silent high-mindedness to trample my final shred of self-respect. She left me alone with the obsidian truth. My angel was, in reality, the most lustful and cruel ghost in the entire film capital. Olivia de Havilland was not just a co-star. She was the most terrifying architect of Flynn's ruin, a woman who used the illusion of virtue to facilitate a life of calculated, unrepentant promiscuity. 6. Gina Lollobrigida, the carnal goddess and the predatory instincts of Rome. While Hollywood was still clumsily wrestling with its rigid moral codes, Gina Lollobrigida brought a scorching wind of carnality directly from Rome, incinerating every barrier with the raw, untamed instincts of a Mediterranean goddess. The classic American audience surely remembers the breathtaking beauty of the 20th century Mona Lisa, but behind that shimmering aura lurked a lustful phantom who never acknowledged the concept of fidelity. In the fading, weary eyes of Errol Flynn, Gina was the embodiment of a ruthless predator, a woman who wielded her promiscuity as a divine, sovereign right to enslave any soul she marked for capture. The first authentic anecdote of her duplicity began at the Grotta Ferrata Villa in 1954 during the filming of Crossed Swords. At this residence, Flynn and Gina lived together as a high-powered celebrity couple. However, every time Flynn departed the villa for the Cinecittà Studios, Gina quietly orchestrated her own private, carnal empire. Servants from that era whispered of midnight tea parties hosted for a rotating cast of lovers, ranging from young, hungry aristocrats to the action director Milton Crims. A shocking, seismic incident occurred when Flynn returned home unexpectedly early, only to find Gina draped in a diaphanous, sheer nightgown, nonchalantly entwined in the arms of Milton Crims right in the center of the main hall. Instead of showing a shred of embarrassment, Gina coldly commanded a servant to bring more vintage wine for her guest, leaving Flynn paralyzed in a state of ultimate, hollowed-out humiliation within his own sanctuary. Gina's punitive brazenness was inextricably tied to the scandalous drama at the Venice Film Festival. Rumors of her public hunt conducted before hundreds of flashing camera lenses were the centerpiece of the era's most vitriolic tabloids. While Flynn attempted to maintain his fading, swashbuckling persona on the red carpet, Gina shamelessly engaged in a feverish, overt flirtation with Vittorio De Sica, Flynn's legendary and formidable cinematic rival. She utilized scorched earth glances and bold, carnal gestures to hijack the global spotlight, effectively reducing Flynn to a pathetic, discarded spectator. An authentic entry from the diary of a prominent paparazzi of that time recounts how Gina ensured Flynn witnessed her sharing a primal, lingering kiss with De Sica in a lightless, mist-shrouded Venice alleyway, proving to the world that her carnal power belonged solely to whoever could provide her with the zenith of fame and influence. The darkest secret, a haunting memory that followed Flynn to his very grave, was revealed only in the trembling, jagged script of his final suicide note. It was a visceral indictment of a carnal negotiation on the set of the masterpiece Trapeze, 1956, in Paris. In the letter, Flynn recounts accidentally intruding into the mobile office of production mogul Harold Hecht. Through the amber blur of heavy velvet curtains, a naked, jagged truth emerged. Gina, the pristine Mona Lisa, was being openly promiscuous in the arms of the dashing Burt Lancaster. She nonchalantly allowed Lancaster to fondle her, engaging in the most lewd acts while her eyes blazed with a triumphant, predatory glint aimed directly at the revised contract sitting on Hecht's desk. Her ease with Lancaster was not a mere affair of the heart. It was a high-stakes carnal power play where Gina utilized her body to seize absolute control over the film's final cut. Authentic whispers from the production crew that year suggest that immediately following this event, Gina successfully coerced the producers to delete a massive series of scenes featuring other female co-stars, transforming the movie into a solo stage for her own predatory allure. She utilized her infidelity as the only global currency to purchase cinematic immortality, leaving Flynn with the crushing public disgrace of a man cast out of the power game before the eyes of the entire world. 7. Barbara Stanwyck, the glacial promiscuity and the sovereign power of the noir queen. Barbara Stanwyck never surrendered herself to the flickering flames of desire. She utilized her carnality as a scepter of absolute dominion. To the classic American audience, she remains the quintessential Iron Lady of the film noir era, but her most bone-chilling secrets were dragged into the light only within the final suicide note of Errol Flynn. Flynn's testimony reveals that Stanwyck transformed her existence into a brutal carnal exchange floor, where a single, weighted glance possessed the market value of an A-list contract. The most visceral, bone-chilling truth resides within the blood pact forged between her and the legendary director Frank Capra. In his letter, Flynn recounts a harrowing event on the set of The Bitter Tea of General Yen, 1933. One lightless night, Flynn accidentally witnessed Stanwyck within the shadows of a fabricated palace set. She was not merely being promiscuous with Capra, but was executing a perverse psychological manipulation. She forced the brilliant director to grovel at her feet, demanding he perform the most base, humiliating sexual acts merely so she would agree to lend her soul and body to his cinematic vision. Stanwyck utilized her cold-blooded lewdness to utterly enslave Capra's intellect, transforming him into a loyal, carnal servant who was willing to betray every personal value in exchange for her immortal presence on celluloid. Later, Capra's own absolute, submissive adoration of Stanwyck served as a silent, grim confirmation that what Flynn witnessed was the naked, jagged truth. The suicide note further unveils the ghastly reality of the Lavender play, the union between Stanwyck and the matinee idol Robert Taylor. Flynn reveals that Stanwyck did not occupy the role of a traditional wife, but that of a formidable blackmail queen. She weaponized her own carnality as a shield to guard the secret of Taylor's true sexuality, while simultaneously using it as a spear to manipulate the high-ranking moguls of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Flynn recounts a night at a clandestine West Hollywood club where Stanwyck was shamelessly promiscuous in the arms of studio titans, dispensing sex as a form of elite privilege. This was the currency she traded to ensure that Robert Taylor remained America's perfect man, while she secured her own sovereign noir kingdom. Her ease with the dark powers of Hollywood was a spiritual execution aimed at Flynn, proving that he was not even worth the value of a pawn in the high-stakes game of carnal power she commanded. The absolute zenith of her calculated cruelty, as recorded by Flynn, was the carnal purge, executed directly within the office of Jack Warner. In his final writing, he describes how Stanwyck staged a meticulously planned performance of lewdness upon the mogul's very desk, granting Warner her most depraved moments solely to ensure Flynn was completely eradicated from the Project Crywolf, 1947. Flynn's sudden, unexplained replacement at the final hour became the most visible evidence of her carnal sovereignty. Stanwyck never betrayed a heart out of mindless impulse. She utilized sex to psychologically and professionally castrate Flynn's career. Barbara Stanwyck, through the final jagged breaths of Flynn's confession, emerges as a glacial phantom, a woman who transformed promiscuity into a cold, metallic currency used to enslave the souls of titans, leaving Errol Flynn shattered in a castle of his own sins with the bitter truth. In the world of the noir queen, Hollywood's greatest rogue was merely a worthless footman to be crushed beneath the iron heel of her power. Errol Flynn died in a state of bone-deep emptiness, finally realizing that the carnal list he left behind was never a punishment for those silver screen sirens, but a naked mirror reflecting the most decayed shadows within his own soul. A place where the hollow pleasure of the voyeur was merely a toxic draft meant to soothe an eternal solitude. If these obsidian corners of the film capital have left you unsettled, please hit like and subscribe to our channel so you can continue this journey with us as we tear back the heavy velvet curtains of history. Do not forget to activate the notification bell so you never miss the secrets long buried by the dust of time in a place where the truth remains darker than any frame of celluloid. Thank you for venturing with us into the shadowed realm of legends.